Here you are!" came from the deck of the Dulcibella, and the dim form of von Brüning himself emerged from the companionway. There was something of a scuffle down below, which the Commander nearly succeeded in drowning by the breeziness of his greeting. Meanwhile the ladder creaked under fresh weight, and Dollmann appeared. "Is that you, Herr Davies?" he said. "Hallo, Herr Dollmann," said Davies. "How are you?" I must explain that we had floated up between the yacht and the launch, whose sailors had passed her a little aside in order to give us room. Her starboard side light was just behind and above us, pouring its green rays obliquely over the deck of the Dulcibella, while we and the dinghy were in the deep shadow between. The most studied calculation could not have secured us more favourable conditions for a moment which I had always dreaded, the meeting of Davies and Dollmann. The former, having shortened his sculls, just sat where he was, half turned towards the yacht, and looking up at his enemy. No lineament of his own face could have been visible to the latter, while those pitiless green rays—you know their ravaging effect on the human physiognomy—struck full on Dollmann's face. It was my first fair view of it at close quarters, and, secure in my background of gloom, I feasted with the luxury of superstitious abhorrence on the livid smiling mask that for a few moments stooped peering down towards Davies. One of the caprices of the crude light was to obliterate, or at any rate so penetrate, beard and moustache as to reveal in outline lips and chin, the features in which defects of character are most surely betrayed, especially when your victim smiles. Accuse me, if you will, of stooping to melodramatic embroidery, object that my own prejudiced fancy contributed to the result, but I can, nevertheless, never efface the impression of malignant perfidy amid base passion, exaggerated to caricature, that I received in those few instants. Another caprice of the light was to identify the man with a portrait of him, when younger and clean-shaven, in the frontispiece of his own book; and another still, the most repulsively whimsical of all, was to call forth a strong resemblance to the sweet young girl who had been with us yesterday. Enough! I shall never offend again in this way. In reality I am much more inclined to laugh than shudder over this meeting, for meanwhile the third of our self-invited guests had with stertorous puffing risen to the stage, for all the world like a demon out of a trap-door, especially when he entered the zone of that unearthly light. And there they stood in a row, like delinquents at judgment, while we, the true culprits, had only passively to accept explanations. Of course these were plausible enough. Dollmann, having seen the yacht in port that morning, had called on his return from Memmert to ask us to supper. Finding no one aboard, and concluding we were ashore, he had meant to leave a note for Davies in the cabin. His friend, Herr Böhme, the distinguished engineer, was anxious to see over the little vessel that had come so far, and he knew that Davies would not mind the intrusion. "Not at all," said Davies. "Would not they stop and have drinks?" "No, but would we come to supper at Dollmann's villa?" "With pleasure," said Davies, "but we had to change first." Up to this point we had been masters of the situation, but here von Brüning, who alone of the three appeared to be entirely at his ease, made the retour offensif. "Where have you been?" he asked. "Oh, rowing about since the fog cleared," said Davies. I suppose he thought that evasion would pass muster, but as he spoke I noted to my horror that a stray beam of light was playing on the bunch of white cotton waste that adorned one of the rowlocks, for we had forgotten to remove these tell-tale appendages. So I added, "After ducks again?" and lifting one of the guns, let the light flash on its barrel. To my own ears my voice sounded husky and distant. "Always ducks," laughed von Brüning. "No luck, I suppose?" "No," said Davies, "but it ought to be a good time after sunset." What, with the rising tide and the banks covered? We saw some, said Davies sullenly. I tell you what, my zealous young sportsman, you're rash to leave your boat at anchor here after dark without a light. I came aboard to find your lamp and set it. Oh, thanks, said Davies. We took it with us. To see the shoot by? We laughed uncomfortably, and Davies compassed a wonderful German phrase to the effect that it might come in useful. Happily the matter went no farther, for the position was a strained one at the best, and would not bear lengthening. The launch went alongside, and the invaders evacuated British soil, looking, for all von Brüning's flippant nonchalance, a rather crestfallen party. So much so that, acute as was my anxiety, I took courage to whisper to Davies, while the transshipment of Herr Böhme was proceeding, "Ask Dollmann to stay while we dress." "Why?" he whispered. "Go on." "I say, Herr Dollmann," said Davies, "won't you stay on board with us while we dress? There's a lot to tell you, and we can follow on with you when we're ready." Dollmann had not yet stepped into the launch. "With pleasure," he said, but there followed an ominous silence, broken by von Brüning. "Oh, come along, Dollmann, and let them alone," he said brusquely. "You'll be horribly in the way down there, and we shall never get any supper if you keep them yarning." "And it's now 8:15, grumbled Herr Böhme from his corner behind the hood. Dollmann submitted and excused himself, and the launch steamed away. "I think I twig," said Davies as he helped, almost hoisted, me aboard. "Rather risky though, eh?" I knew they'd object, only wanted to make sure. The cabin was just as we had left it, our shore clothes lying in disorder on the bunks, a locker or two half open. "Well, I wonder what they did down here," said Davies. For my part, I went straight to the bookshelf. "Does anything strike you about this?" I asked, kneeling on the sofa. "Logbooks shifted," said Davies. "I swear it was at the end before." "That doesn't matter. Anything else?" "By Jove! Where's Dollmann's book?" "It's here all right, but not where it should be." I had been reading it, you remember, overnight, and in the morning had replaced it in full view among the other books. I now found it behind them, in a wrenched attitude, which showed that someone who had no time to spare had pushed it roughly inwards. "What do you make of that?" said Davies. He produced long drinks, and we allowed ourselves 10 minutes of absolute rest, stretched at full length on the sofas. "They don't trust Dollmann," I said. "I spotted that at Memmert even." "How?" "First, when they were talking about you and me. He was on his defence, and in a deuce of a funk, too. Böhme was pressing him hard. Again, at the end, when he left the room followed by Grimm, who I'm certain was sent to watch him. It was while he was away that the other two arranged that rendezvous for the night of the 25th. And again just now, when you asked him to stay. I believe it's working out as I thought it would. Von Brüning, and through him Böhme, who is the 'engineer from Bremen,' knew the story of that short cut, and suspect that it was an attempt on your life. Dollmann daren't confess to that, because, morality apart, it could only have been prompted by extreme necessity, that is, by the knowledge that you were really dangerous, and not merely an inquisitive stranger. Now we know his motive, but they don't yet. The position of that book proves it." "He shoved it in?" "To prevent them seeing it. There's no earthly reason why they should have hidden it." "Then we're getting on," said Davies. "That shows they know his real name, or why should he shove the book in? But they don't know he wrote a book, and that I have a copy. At any rate he thinks they don't, we can't say more than that. And what does he think about me, and you?" "That's the point. 10 to 1 he's in tortures of doubt, and would give a fortune to have 5 minutes' talk alone with you to see how the